Welcome to Shredder Fanfic. Like, subscribe, and hype video. Join members to gain early access to new videos.
The main character, after dying in his previous life, he wakes up as Tony's brother inside of Marvel, and he creates the Zerg Queen. What is he gonna do inside of Marvel?
All day, and I leaned back, taking my time. Finally, Tony spoke again. So let me get this straight. You've got a secret bug army in your basement. Not in the basement, I corrected. Bigger than that. Bigger than that, he repeated, his voice rising. I grinned. Much bigger. Pepper set her fork down. How big? I chewed slowly, then shrugged. Millions, eventually. Both of them froze. Millions, Pepper repeated, her voice sharp. Tony dropped his fork onto the plate with a clatter. Millions? Are you kidding me? I grinned wider, not even a little. Tony stared at me, his mouth half open. Then he leaned back in his chair, groaning loudly. I can't believe this. First Obi, now this. I need stronger drinks. Pepper looked between us, her expression tight. This is insane. I shrugged again. It's effective. Effective, Pepper's voice spiked. You're talking about unleashing millions of monsters. Not monsters, I said firmly, though my tone stayed light. They're controlled. They don't do anything unless I tell them to. Pepper's eyes narrowed. And what happens if you're not there to tell them? They wait, I said simply. She stared at me for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. Tony shook his head, muttering, This is insane. You're insane, and I'm apparently insane for putting up with it. I grinned. Runs in the family. He pointed his fork at me. Don't start. Pepper sighed again, rubbing her temples. I don't like this at all, but I saw what they did. They saved you, both of you. Tony muttered, still not normal. But useful, Pepper finished. Her words hung in the air. Tony frowned, staring down at his plate. I leaned back, smiling faintly. See, she gets it, I said. Tony groaned. No, don't twist this. Pepper picked up her fork again. I'm not saying I approve, but if they're going to exist, you'd better make sure they never hurt anyone who doesn't deserve it. I nodded, my smile softening. Deal. Tony muttered something under his breath, but he didn't argue further. He just went back to eating, his movements sharp and quick. The rest of dinner passed more quietly. Pepper asked about work, Tony deflected with sarcasm, and I teased them both whenever I had the chance. The tension eased slowly, though Pepper's eyes stayed sharp whenever she looked at me. By the time we finished, the plates were nearly clean, and the sun had vanished completely outside. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the ocean below. Pepper stood, gathering dishes. I'll clean up. You two don't make a mess while I'm gone. Tony leaned back in his chair, exhaling. She's going to kill us both one day. I grinned, probably. Tony shook his head, muttering again. But this time, there was a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Chapter 17. An Unexpected Visitor. The morning after dinner was quiet. The sun filtered in through the blinds, warm light cutting across the desk in the control room. The hum of the hive base below was steady, the monitors showing the queens laying eggs without pause, the brood dragging fresh slabs of meat to the incubation chambers. I sipped coffee from a chipped mug, tapping a pen against the edge of my notebook. The log for the night's numbers was already filled. 6 queens had doubled their output, another had laid an egg cluster nearly twice as large as usual, and the soldiers were now patrolling in coordinated formations instead of loose clusters. Every detail mattered, and I wrote them all down. The sound of the doorbell broke the routine. I frowned, setting the mug aside. Not many people came to my place. Delivery drivers dropped shipments at the outer gate. Tony came sometimes, but never in the morning. Pepper, even less. The bell rang again. I stood, stretched once, and made my way upstairs. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the air systems. The bell chimed a third time as I reached the front door. I pulled it open. A woman stood on the step, holding a small stack of flyers. Her red hair was pulled back neatly, her outfit casual but clean, dark jeans, a light jacket, and boots. Her face was calm, polite, almost blandly professional. "Good morning," she said smoothly, holding out one of the flyers. "I'm offering cleaning services in the area. Housekeeping, organization, small repairs. If you're interested, here's the information." I blinked once, then glanced at the flyer she handed me. The logo was generic, the text promising discreet professional service and full confidentiality. I looked back at her, grinning faintly. "Cleaning services, ha?" "That's right," she said evenly. Her tone was polite, her smile practiced, but her eyes flicked once behind me into the house before settling back on me. Most people wouldn't notice. I did. I took the flyer and twirled it lightly between my fingers. "You don't look like a maid." Her smile didn't falter. "That's because I'm not one yet. It's a new business. I'm helping promote it." "Right," I said cheerfully. "Well, thanks for the flyer." I stepped back, already closing the door. "Have a good day." "Thank you for your time," she said smoothly, turning away down the path. The door clicked shut behind me. I stood for a long moment in the quiet entryway, the flyer still in my hand. Natasha Romanoff. I knew the face, the tone, the presence. In my past life, I had seen her countless times on screen. She was supposed to be at Tony's side now, inserted into his company under the cover of a new assistant. She was supposed to earn his trust, evaluate his stability, and report to Fury about whether the Iron Man suit could be trusted. But she had just knocked on my door instead. That meant Fury's priorities had shifted. He wasn't sending her to watch Tony anymore. He was sending her to watch me. I looked down at the flyer, the neat font and generic promises. It was just a prop, a way to make contact. They weren't after Tony's armor. They were after my hive. I laughed softly, shaking my head. Well, that's new. I walked back into the control room, tossed the flyer onto the desk, and sat down again. The monitors glowed with the steady movement of the brood. Queens laying eggs, workers feeding larvae, soldiers patrolling. Of course Fury was interested. He wasn't blind. Reports of Obadiah's fight, of the rooftop battle, of thousands of creatures tearing through the 10 rings, all of it would have been on his desk within hours. He had seen Tony's suit, yes, but he had also seen the swarm. And now Natasha had shown up at my door with a flyer. I leaned back, grinning faintly. Guess I'm popular. The hive below buzzed steadily, the sound vibrating faintly through the floor. I tapped my pen against the desk, cheerful on the surface, but serious beneath it. Fury wasn't sending Natasha here out of curiosity. He wanted to know if I was a threat. That meant I had to decide how to play this. The rest of the day moved slowly. I logged the shipments of meat, checked the environmental systems, walked the tunnels twice. Every chamber was full of activity. The brood ate constantly, larvae growing quickly, soldiers reinforcing walls. The queens laid without pause. But every time I looked at the monitors, I thought about the flyer on the desk, about Natasha's polite voice, about Fury's interest. Tony was supposed to be the center of attention right now. Instead, I was. Chapter 18, covering tracks. The flyer still lay on my desk. Neat white paper, bold black letters, promises of discreet service. It looked harmless, but I knew better. Natasha's visit wasn't about cleaning. It was about infiltration. And that meant Fury had already marked me. I sipped from my mug, the coffee lukewarm now, and set it down carefully. The monitors glowed with the steady movement of the hives. Queens crouched low, abdomens pulsing with eggs. Soldiers patrolled in lines. Workers dragged meat into incubation pits. It was too much to hide completely. Not from SHILD. If they wanted in, they'd find a way in. The smarter move wasn't to block them. It was to control what they saw. I stood stretched and grabbed my notebook. Time for some redecorating. The first step was reducing visibility. 90% of the hive would be hidden, sealed behind reinforced bulkheads and false walls. Only one section, a tenth of the base, would remain visible. Enough to impress, enough to explain, but not enough to reveal the scale. I walked down into the tunnels, boots crunching against the soil. The air grew thicker, humid, alive with sound. Wings buzzed, mandibles clicked, workers scurried. The queens stirred as I passed, their antennae twitching, but none moved. I clapped my hands twice, sharply. The swarm stilled instantly. I moved to the central control chamber, where steel doors branched off in every direction. I keyed in commands on the panels, heavy shutters grinding closed over half the tunnels. Queens shifted uneasily as their chambers darkened, but the environmental systems stayed steady. The brood continued their work. Hidden behind walls, no one would be able to breach without my access. I left only one chamber open. Inside, a single queen crouched in the soil, her brood buzzing softly around her. Egg clusters lined the floor, glowing faintly under the artificial lights. Workers carried slabs of meat to the feeding platforms, mandibles slicing it into smaller strips. Soldiers patrolled near the edges, their mandibles snapping. This chamber looked impressive, alive, dangerous, and under control, perfect for what I wanted SHILD to see. I leaned against the railing, grinning faintly. "You're the star of the show." The queen buzzed softly, her wings vibrating once before folding again. The second step was cleanup. I couldn't risk leaving traces of the full hive in the open chambers, not eggshells from other queens, not pheromone trails leading into sealed tunnels. Workers could be messy. They needed strict boundaries. I clapped again, giving a sharp whistle. The drones nearest me froze, antennae twitching. I gestured toward the sealed doors, motioning sharply downward. The response was immediate. They began clearing stray shells, dragging debris into hidden chambers. Soldiers shifted, repositioning themselves into tighter patrols only along the open section. The hum of movement filled the chamber as the brood reorganized, sealing away anything that would suggest a larger network. Within an hour, the open section looked like a standalone experiment. Neat, efficient, believable. The third step was making contact. I walked back upstairs, picked up the flyer, and dialed the number printed neatly in the corner. The line rang once before connecting. "Hello," a calm female voice answered. I recognized it immediately. Natasha. "Yeah, hi," I said cheerfully. "I got your flyer. Figured I could use some cleaning." There was a pause, short but noticeable. Then her tone softened slightly. "Of course. We'll schedule something soon. When would you like us to come by?" "Tomorrow," I said lightly. "Morning's good." "Tomorrow morning," she repeated, confirming. "We'll be there." "Great, see you then," I said, then hung up without waiting. The flyer went back onto the desk. The monitors glowed steadily. The hive buzzed below, organized and ready. If Fury wanted a look, I'd give him one, but only the part I wanted him to see. That night, I made a final pass through the open chamber. The queen crouched quietly, her brood moving in steady rhythm. Egg clusters glistened under the lights. Soldiers clacked their mandibles, steady and sharp. Workers dragged meat from the feeding platform, tearing it into smaller strips. I crouched at the edge of the pit, watching. "You'll have visitors tomorrow. Be on your best behavior." The queen buzzed once, her wings vibrating faintly. I smiled faintly and patted the railing. "Good girl." The rest of the hive buzzed faintly behind their sealed walls. 90% hidden, untouchable. 10% on display. Enough to explain, enough to intimidate, but not enough to reveal the truth. I went back upstairs, shut down the lights, and leaned into the couch. Tomorrow would be interesting. Chapter 19. Under Watchful Eyes. The morning air was sharp and quiet. The hive base hummed faintly beneath the house, a steady vibration that carried through the floor if you stood still long enough. I sat in the control room, coffee mug warm in my hands, watching the monitors. Workers dragged meat to feeding pits, queens crouched low over their egg clusters, soldiers patrolled. Everything ran like clockwork. At exactly 9, the doorbell rang. I set the mug down, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled once. Then I pushed myself up, stretched lazily, and made my way upstairs. The bell chimed again as I reached the door. I opened it. Natasha stood there, dressed simply. Fitted jacket, dark pants, hair tied neatly back. She held a small tote bag in one hand and wore a polite smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Good morning," she said smoothly. "I'm here for the cleaning appointment." "Morning," I said cheerfully, stepping aside. "Come on in." She nodded once, stepping past me with measured grace. Her eyes flicked briefly across the entryway, the walls, the furniture, every detail, before settling back into a professional calm. I closed the door, grinning faintly. "Try not to break anything." "Of course," she said evenly. She set her bag down and pulled out a pair of gloves, slipping them on. Everything about the motion was deliberate, practiced. Too practiced for an ordinary cleaner. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching. "So, you do this often?" "Every day," she said without hesitation. She opened her bag again, pulling out a spray bottle and cloth. "I like things neat." "Neat, overrated," I said lightly. Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but it didn't last. She turned and started dusting the shelves, her movements efficient and precise. She worked in silence for several minutes, moving from surface to surface, her eyes flicking briefly toward the corners of each room before lowering again. I didn't move, I just watched. By the time she reached the hallway, I slipped away into the control room again. The monitors glowed with steady light. I tapped one feed, pulling up the chamber I'd left open. The Queen crouched low, her brood swarming calmly. Workers moved in neat lines, soldiers patrolled with steady mandible clicks. A new feed flickered. A small lens appeared at the top corner of the screen. Natasha had placed it discreetly near the bookshelf. I smiled faintly. "Caught you." I let her keep it. One lens in a controlled space was fine. She'd find what I wanted her to find, nothing more. The feed showed her moving steadily through the house, cleaning as she went. Then she reached the basement door. She paused briefly, her hand resting on the knob before pulling it open. I leaned closer to the monitor. She descended the stairs slowly, her head turning slightly as she scanned the walls. At the bottom, the single open chamber glowed faintly. The Queen stirred as Natasha entered. Her wings buzzed once, mandibles clacking softly. The brood shifted, but none attacked. They stayed where they were, exactly as I had trained them. Natasha stopped at the edge of the railing. Her posture didn't change, but her eyes narrowed faintly. She lifted her phone slowly, as if checking a message. The faint click of the camera captured the entire chamber. I watched the monitor closely. She zoomed in, adjusting, taking multiple shots from different angles. The Queen's abdomen pulsed steadily, dropping a fresh cluster of eggs into the soil. Workers moved immediately to carry them away. Natasha lowered her phone, slid it into her pocket, then stepped closer to the railing. Her eyes scanned the chamber carefully, lingering on the feeding platforms stacked with meat, the soldiers clacking their mandibles in rhythm, the egg clusters glistening under the lights. Her hand shifted subtly toward the railing, her body angled as if preparing to lean closer. I stood. The chair scraped softly against the floor. I walked down the hallway, boots steady against the wood, and opened the basement door loudly. "Everything all right down there?" I called cheerfully. Natasha straightened instantly. By the time I stepped into view, she had turned away from the chamber, cloth in hand, calmly wiping the railing as if she had been cleaning the entire time. "Yes," she said smoothly, her tone even. "Just dusty." I leaned against the doorframe, grinning faintly. "Careful, don't want to disturb the pets." Her eyes flicked briefly toward me, then back to the railing. "Of course." She continued wiping slowly, deliberately, before moving back up the stairs. I followed behind her, my grin never fading. Back in the living room, she resumed her routine. dusting, wiping, adjusting. Her movements were calm, unhurried, but her eyes flicked once toward me before settling back into her professional mask. I stretched out on the couch, arms behind my head. "So, how's business?" "Steady," she said, her voice level. "Good to hear," I said cheerfully. She didn't answer. For the next 2 hours, she moved from room to room. Floors, shelves, counters. Every movement was neat, efficient. She placed 2 more tiny lenses in corners, one near the kitchen, another near the hallway, both so subtle most people would never notice. I noticed, and I let them stay. When she finally packed her bag again, slipping the gloves neatly inside, she turned to me with the same polite smile she had arrived with. "Thank you for your time," she said. "Anytime," I said lightly. "House has never been this clean." Her lips twitched faintly, but she didn't reply. She walked to the door, opened it smoothly, and stepped outside. The door clicked shut behind her. I stayed on the couch for several minutes, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the hive below. Then I pushed myself up, walked back into the control room, and sat down in front of the monitors. The feeds glowed steady, queens laying, workers feeding, soldiers patrolling. And in one corner of the screen, the new lens Natasha had planted blinked faintly. I grinned. Enjoy the show. Chapter 20. Hydra in the Dark. The night was quiet. The house was dark except for the faint glow of the monitors in the control room. I sat slouched in the chair, one leg stretched out, flipping through the camera feeds idly while sipping a cup of black coffee. The hive bass hummed faintly beneath the floor, the sound steady and comforting. Queens laid, brood fed, soldiers patrolled. Everything was calm. Then the alarm went off. A sharp beep cut through the silence, followed by a red flash on the main screen. I sat up instantly, my grin fading into focus. The perimeter sensors had triggered. I tapped the keyboard, pulling up the outside cameras. The feeds flickered, switching through the angles around the property. The night vision glow lit the screen in pale green. Trees, dirt road, shadows moving. There. 5 figures dressed in black, rifles slung across their shoulders. They moved low, efficient, coordinated. Their steps were precise, their scans sharp, not common thieves, too disciplined for that. Hydra. I leaned forward, elbows on the desk, watching. Well, guess word, getting out. The 5 men moved in formation, hugging the edge of the tree line. They paused near the outer fence, one kneeling to cut through the wiring while the others kept watch. Their rifles tracked the darkness, their helmets glinting faintly under the moonlight. I tapped another key, switching to thermal. Their heat signatures glowed bright against the cool night. They weren't amateurs. I sipped the last of my coffee, set the mug down, and reached for the control panel. I could unleash everything. 100 queens, thousands of brood, the entire hive. But that would be overkill. And worse, it would draw too much attention. No, this needed to be controlled. A message, not a massacre. I keyed in the command. The camera feeds flickered, switching to the chosen chamber. An ant queen stirred in the soil, her massive form shifting slowly as she rose. Her antennae twitched, her mandibles clacked. Workers and soldiers clustered around her, their bodies bristling with readiness. Her abdomen pulsed faintly, but she did not lay. She waited. I leaned closer to the monitor, grinning faintly. Your turn tonight. I pressed the release. The chamber doors ground open, leading upward through reinforced tunnels. The queen moved first, her legs thudding softly against the soil as she climbed. Drones followed in perfect rhythm, dozens of them pouring behind her, their mandibles snapping in unison. The cameras outside picked up their emergence a few moments later. The ground split open silently just beyond the tree line. The queen rose from the earth, her bulk casting a long shadow across the grass. Her drones swarmed around her, legs moving in perfect coordination, antennae twitching sharply as they locked onto the intruders. The Hydra agents froze. One barked a sharp order in German. The others spread instantly, rifles snapping up. Their movements were smooth, trained. I chuckled, leaning back in my chair. Let's see how long that lasts. The first agent fired. The muzzle flash lit the night, bullets cutting through the air. Sparks flew as rounds slammed into the Queen's thick carapace. She barely flinched. She screeched, mandibles snapping, and surged forward. The drones rushed with her. The Hydra agents opened fire fully, rifles rattling, the sound sharp and constant. Bullets tore into the drones, some dropping instantly, but the rest surged forward without hesitation. They hit the line of agents like a wave, mandibles clamping down on legs and arms, dragging men to the ground. The Queen barreled into the center, her mandibles slamming shut around one man's torso. His scream cut short as she tossed him aside, his body crumpling against a tree. The others fought hard, firing point-blank into the swarm. 2 drones fell, twitching, mandibles snapping weakly before going still. But for everyone that fell, 2 more replaced it, their legs scraping, their jaws snapping. I watched calmly from the monitors, arms crossed. Should have stayed home, boys. Another agent tried to retreat, firing as he backed toward the trees. The Queen lunged, her mandibles slamming into his rifle, tearing it free in a single snap. She lifted him by the chest, tossing him into the dirt as drones swarmed over him. 3 down, 2 left. The last pair fought together, backs against each other, rifles firing in bursts. They moved in sync, covering angles, their discipline holding even as the swarm pressed harder. The Queen circled them slowly, her drones tightening the ring. Mandibles clicked in steady rhythm, the sound loud even through the speakers. One of the agents shouted something I couldn't hear. Then they broke. One ran for the tree line, the other covering him with rapid fire. The Queen ignored the one running. She surged toward the man firing, her mandibles snapping shut around his arm. The rifle clattered to the ground as she dragged him off his feet, tossing him into the swarm. Drones swarmed instantly, dragging him down. The last agent sprinted across the grass, legs pumping hard. He reached the edge of the trees. A cluster of drones burst from the soil in front of him, cutting off his escape. His eyes widened as he skidded to a stop. The Queen approached slowly, her mandibles dripping with blood. The agent raised a pistol with shaking hands, firing desperately. Bullets pinged harmlessly off her carapace. She lunged once, her mandibles snapping shut around his waist. His scream echoed faintly through the speakers before cutting short. The swarm stilled. I leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and tapped the microphone. Clean it up. The Queen clacked her mandibles once, sharp and final. The drones obeyed instantly, dragging bodies into the tunnels, stripping weapons, clearing the ground of debris. Within minutes, the grass was bare again. No blood, no rifles, no trace. The perimeter sensors fell silent. I leaned back, stretching my arms behind my head. Not bad for one Queen. On the monitor, the Queen crouched low again, her drones clustering around her. She buzzed faintly, mandibles clacking, before disappearing back into the tunnels. The chamber doors sealed, shut behind her. The house was quiet again. I stood, grabbed my empty mug, and walked into the kitchen. The coffee pot hissed faintly as I poured another cup. The smell filled the air, warm and bitter. I leaned against the counter, sipping slowly, watching the steam curl upward. Hydra had tested my defenses. They wouldn't be the last. But they had learned something tonight. Even one Queen was enough. Chapter 21. Back at Malibu. The morning sun glared off the ocean as I drove up the winding road toward the Malibu mansion. The car hummed steadily, the road empty except for the occasional jogger hugging the cliffside. The night had been long, but the hive was calm now. No alarms, no intruders, just the steady hum of eggs being laid and brood being fed. The house appeared ahead, sleek and bright against the water. The garage doors were already open, music drifting faintly out into the air. I parked in the driveway, killed the engine, and stepped out. The smell of salt and metal mixed in the breeze. I walked straight to the garage. Tony was there, of course, goggles over his eyes, torch in one hand, sparks flying from the gauntlet he was welding. The Mark IV frame stood on the platform beside him, sleek silver plates glinting under the overhead lights. I leaned against the doorway, grinning. You ever stop? Tony didn't look up. If I stop, things blow up. You'd like that too much. Not true, I said cheerfully. I'd like it just the right amount. He set the torch down, lifted his goggles, and glanced at me. What, no bugs with you today? I was hoping to fumigate the place. Sorry, I said, walking in. They don't do house calls. Tony smirked faintly, then grabbed a rag to wipe his hands. So, what brings you here? Don't tell me you missed me. I'll cry. Mostly that, I said, and to make sure you didn't blow yourself up overnight. I only do that on weekends, Tony said. He tossed the rag onto the workbench and grabbed a tablet, swiping through designs. His voice was casual but sharp underneath. You hear about the board, they're panicking. Apparently, no more weapons is a hard concept to sell to stockholders. Shocking, I said dryly. A company built on weapons doesn't like giving them up. He shot me a look. You're supposed to be on my side. I am, I said with a grin. I just like watching you sweat. He muttered under his breath and went back to the tablet. Pepper's losing her mind trying to keep them calm. If I have to sit through one more meeting, I might actually put a rocket in the boardroom. That would solve it, I said. Tempting, Tony replied. I wandered around the workshop, hands in my pockets, eyeing the tools and half-finished designs scattered across the benches. You ever clean this place? Tony gestured broadly. This is organized chaos. Every genius needs it. I picked up a wrench and turned it over in my hands. Feels more like regular chaos. Put that down, he said without looking. I set it back with a grin. Touchy. He sighed, dropping the tablet onto the bench. So, what's with you? You don't usually just drop by without a reason. Can't a guy visit his brother? I asked lightly. Not you, Tony said flatly. I smirked. Fair. He raised an eyebrow, waiting. I shrugged. Nothing big, just thought I'd check in, make sure you're still alive, maybe steal some food. Kitchen's upstairs, Tony said. Don't eat the pizza, it's a week old. Noted, I said. He leaned back against the bench, crossing his arms. Seriously, though, everything good. I hesitated briefly, then grinned again. Peachy. He didn't buy it, of course. His eyes narrowed slightly, sharp behind the casual expression. Peachy, huh? Yep. Last time you said that, you had 2 broken ribs and a black eye. Different peachy, I said cheerfully. Tony shook his head, muttering, You're impossible. And you love it, I shot back. He snorted faintly, then grabbed the torch again. Sparks flared as he bent over the gauntlet. One of these days, you're going to get me killed. I leaned against the workbench beside him, grinning. Nah, I'll keep you alive. Someone gotta annoy me. Touching, he said dryly. We spent the next hour like that, him tinkering, me throwing in comments every few minutes. He cursed at the suit when a wire shorted. I laughed. He glared at me. I grinned back. Eventually, he set the gauntlet down and pulled the goggles off again. His hair was sticking up, his face smudged with grease. You know, you could help, he said. Not my field, I replied cheerfully. Excuses, he muttered. You don't want me touching your toys, I said. Trust me. Tony smirked faintly. Fair point. Pepper came down halfway through, files in hand, her heels clicking against the steps. She stopped at the edge of the workshop, her eyes flicking between us. Lunch in an hour, she said. And Tony, you have a call with the board after. I'm busy, Tony said immediately. You'll make time, Pepper replied. Her eyes narrowed briefly at the grease on his face. And clean up before you take the call." Tony muttered something under his breath, but Pepper ignored it and turned, heading back upstairs. I grinned at him. She's scarier than Obadiah. "Don't let her hear you say that," Tony muttered. "Already did," Pepper's voice floated faintly from upstairs. I laughed. Tony groaned. When Pepper was gone, Tony slumped against the bench again. "You ever think about leaving, just packing up, taking off?" I raised an eyebrow. "You running away?" "Just asking," he said. I smirked. "Not my style. Too much fun here." "Fun," Tony said, incredulous. "Watching you panic about the board is worth it," I said. He stared at me for a second, then chuckled reluctantly. "You're insane. And you're just realizing that now." "Go home," he said, shaking his head. I stretched lazily, heading for the stairs. "See you tomorrow." "Don't," Tony called after me. "Love you too," I shouted back cheerfully. He groaned loud enough I heard it all the way to the door. Chapter 22. The Twins in Play. The day after visiting Tony's place was slow. The hive buzzed steadily beneath the house, the sound constant, unchanging. Queens laid eggs in rhythm, soldiers patrolled, workers fed larvae. The monitors in front of me cycled through chamber after chamber. Numbers climbed higher, just as expected. I leaned back in the chair, stretched, and yawned. Too quiet. The coffee on the desk had gone cold. I sipped it anyway, grimacing at the bitterness. My mind wandered. It always did when the hive ran smoothly. No alarms, no disruptions, nothing to deal with, just time to think. The future. The Maximoff siblings. I remembered them clearly. Pietro and Wanda. Sokovian twins caught in Hydra's experiments. Pietro, fast enough to outrun bullets. Wanda, bending minds and reality with her powers. They were still with Hydra at this point in the timeline, still being tested and used. I frowned, tapping the pen against my notebook. Which means, sooner or later, there'll be a problem. Hydra wasn't done with me, not after last night's little raid. 5 agents had been nothing but a probe, a test. I'd crushed them easily with a single queen, but Hydra didn't quit. They escalated. And if the Maximoffs were already under their control? The alarm cut through my thoughts. A sharp beep, red flashing across the main monitor. I sat up instantly, my grin gone. Fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the perimeter cameras. The feeds flickered, switching to the outside grounds. Dozens of heat signatures, not 5, not 10, dozens. The cameras locked on the tree line. Shadows moved in formation. Vehicles, trucks, armored transports. Hydra insignia faint on their doors. Armed men in black, rifles raised, moving with practiced precision. At least 30 of them. I whistled softly. Well, they're not wasting time. The feed zoomed closer. One figure stood out immediately, faster than the others. Blurred. He darted ahead of the formation, paused, then zipped back in a streak of silver. His movements were sharp, impatient. Pietro Maximoff. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. Didn't expect you this soon. The Hydra agents spread out, rifles scanning, eyes sharp. One of the armored trucks halted, its back doors swinging open. More men poured out, carrying heavy crates, rocket launchers, mounted guns. They weren't playing around tonight. I tapped the controls, switching to the hive chambers. The queens stirred, antennae twitched, mandibles clicked. They felt the alarm. I grinned faintly. All right, let's make this interesting. I keyed in the command. The ground outside split open. The first ant queen rose slowly, her massive body breaking through the soil. Her mandibles clacked, her bulk casting a shadow under the moonlight. Behind her, hundreds of drones poured upward, their legs scraping the dirt, their antennae twitching in unison. The Hydra agents froze briefly at the sight. Then their leader barked an order in German, and rifles snapped up. Gunfire tore through the night. The queen surged forward, her mandibles snapping, drones swarming around her. Bullets ricocheted off her carapace, sparks flying. Drones fell, twitching, but the swarm pressed harder, charging into Hydra's front line. Men screamed as they were dragged down, rifles torn from their hands. Drones swarmed over them, mandibles clamping, claws digging. The armored truck opened fire. A mounted gun rattled, spitting out rounds that tore through the swarm. Dozens of drones fell instantly, their bodies scattering across the dirt. The queen shrieked, her mandibles clacking loudly, and charged straight into the truck. Metal screeched as her bulk slammed into the side. The vehicle rocked violently, tipping onto two wheels before crashing back down. Drones swarmed over its surface, tearing at the armor, ripping through the gun mount. Pietro blurred into motion. 1 second he stood by the tree line, the next he was in the middle of the swarm. His silver hair caught the moonlight as he darted between drones, knocking them aside with effortless speed. Mandibles snapped at empty air as he zigzagged through them, his fists slamming drones into the ground. I leaned closer to the monitor, eyes narrowing. Fast, real fast. The queen lunged toward him, her mandibles snapping, but Pietro zipped away instantly, reappearing behind her. He slammed his fist into her leg, making her stumble slightly. She shrieked, swinging her head back, but he was gone before her jaws could close. The Hydra soldiers regrouped, their fire focused now. Rockets whooshed from the treeline, slamming into the swarm with loud detonations. Drones scattered in pieces, soil and smoke filling the air. The queen staggered but held her ground. Her mandibles clacked furiously, summoning more drones from the tunnels. They poured out in fresh waves, crashing into the Hydra line. Pietro blurred again, tearing through their ranks. Soldiers stumbled as he moved, some collapsing from sudden blows, others firing wildly at shadows. I tapped the desk, cheerful despite the chaos. Not bad, but let's see how long you last. The fight stretched across the field. Gunfire rattled, rockets boomed, the swarm buzzed and clacked. The queen tore through Hydra's vehicles, her mandibles crushing metal like paper. Drones dragged men down screaming, their rifles ripped away, their bodies shredded. Pietro was the wild card. He darted constantly, slamming drones aside, distracting the queen, pulling soldiers out of danger before the swarm could finish them. He was fast, faster than anything I'd dealt with so far. But he wasn't untouchable. On the monitor, I watched carefully as he zigzagged across the field. His movements were quick but predictable in pattern. A burst here, a pause there. He favored his right side when turning. I leaned back, smirking faintly. Got you. The queen screeched, mandibles clacking, and ordered her drones into tighter formation. They shifted quickly, forming a net across the field. Pietro darted through them, fists slamming, but each time he turned, drones closed in from the sides. One clipped him, just barely. Mandibles grazed his arm as he zipped past. He hissed, clutching the wound briefly before vanishing again. The queen surged forward, chasing the streak of silver, her drones swarming to box him in. Hydra soldiers were breaking now. Rockets fired wildly, bullets sprayed into the dark, but the swarm pressed harder. Vehicles burned, smoke rising thick into the sky. On the monitor, I tapped the desk again, my grin wide. Looks like you brought the wrong army, Hydra. An hour later, the field was silent. Bodies gone, rifles gone, vehicles gone. The swarm had dragged everything back into the tunnels, leaving nothing but churned soil and smoke. The queen crouched at the edge of the pit, her mandibles clacking softly. Drones circled her, antennae twitching. But Pietro was gone. He'd escaped during the chaos, zipping into the trees and disappearing faster than the swarm could chase. I leaned back in my chair, sighing lightly. Figures. The monitors flickered as the hive settled again. Queens laying, workers feeding, soldiers patrolling. The hum returned to normal. I reached for my cold coffee, sipped, and grimaced again. Next time, kid, I muttered cheerfully. Chapter 23. The weakness of speed. The monitors glowed in the control room long after the battle had ended. The smoke from Hydra's failed raid still drifted faintly across the tree line outside. The hive had cleaned the field, dragging weapons and bodies into the tunnels. But one thought lingered in my head. Pietro Maximoff had escaped. I leaned back in the chair, tapping the pen against the desk. Fast, sure, but not untouchable. He'd been grazed earlier, just barely, and he'd run. He could be tracked. I keyed in the command, switching to the swarm interface. Dozens of ant drones stirred in their chambers, their antennae twitching as they received the order. A single queen shifted slowly, her mandibles clacking once. "Follow him," I ordered. "Don't fight, just follow." The chamber doors ground open, and the drones surged upward into the night. The cameras tracked their movements from the air. They moved in loose formation, crawling low across the ground, their black shells blending into the dark soil. Pietro's trail was faint, but still there, disturbed dirt, bent branches, a faint streak of blood from where a mandible had grazed him. The drones followed silently. For nearly an hour, the feed showed nothing but trees and dirt. Then, suddenly, a blur of silver darted across the screen. Pietro. He stumbled, his speed faltering, his breath sharp and uneven. Sweat streaked his face, his chest heaving with effort. He had run too far, too fast, too long. The drones surged forward. He tried to run again, but his steps faltered. The silver blur broke into jagged, uneven streaks before collapsing entirely. He fell hard onto the dirt, gasping for breath, his body shaking from exhaustion. The drones pounced. By the time he raised his fists, they were already on him. Mandibles clamped around his arms and legs, dragging him down. He struggled violently, but his strength was gone. His breaths came in ragged gasps, his limbs twitching weakly. The queen loomed above him, her mandibles clacking softly. I leaned forward on the monitor, surprised. "You really do burn out." The drones dragged him back through the tunnels, his body thrashing uselessly against their grip. His voice echoed faintly through the speakers. "Let me go." The queen ignored him. They brought him into the open chamber. He struggled again, jerking against the mandibles that held him, but every movement was weaker than the last. Sweat drenched his shirt, his face pale. I stepped into the room above, leaning against the railing. "Well," I said cheerfully, "didn't expect you back so soon." Pietro glared up at me, his chest still heaving. You think this is funny?" "A little," I admitted. "You were fast, I'll give you that, but everyone's got limits." His jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about me." "Maybe not," I said, shrugging, "but I know when someone's out of breath." He struggled again, his arms jerking against the mandibles. "Let me go." "Can't do that," I said lightly. "You're too useful." His eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" I pulled out my phone, spinning it in my hand. "Your sister." His eyes widened. "No, you stay away from her." "Relax," I said cheerfully. "I'm not planning anything bad. I just want to talk." "You think I'll let you near her?" Pietro spat. I grinned faintly. "You don't really have a choice, do you?" His breathing quickened again, his eyes flashing with anger. "Don't touch her. Don't even say her name." I tapped the phone idly, ignoring his words. "Call her." He froze. "Now," I said. His jaw clenched, but his eyes darted briefly toward the drones gripping him. Slowly, reluctantly, he gave me the number. I dialed. The line rang twice before clicking. A woman's voice answered, soft but edged. "Pietro." "Not exactly," I said cheerfully. Silence, then sharper. "Who is this?" "Your brother's safe," I said calmly. "With me." Her voice spiked instantly. "What did you do to him?" "Nothing permanent," I said. "He's just tired. You can see for yourself tomorrow. I want to make a trade." Silence again. Her breathing was audible over the line. Finally, she said flatly, "I'll come." Tomorrow morning, I said. Don't be late. The line clicked dead. I slid the phone back into my pocket. Pietro glared at me furiously. If you hurt her. I waved a hand casually. Relax, she'll be fine. You, though, you should rest. He screamed at me, jerking violently against the drones, his voice echoing off the chamber walls. You touch her, I'll kill you. Noted, I said cheerfully. I turned, heading for the door. See you in the morning. His shouts followed me as I climbed the stairs. I closed the door behind me, muffling his voice. The hallway was quiet again, the hum of the hive steady below. I walked back to the control room and sat heavily in the chair. The monitors glowed softly, showing the sealed chambers, the brood moving steadily. Queens laid eggs, workers dragged meat, soldiers patrolled. But my mind wasn't on them. It was on wonder. Chaos magic. Even in her earliest stages, she was dangerous. She had turned Hydra's experiments into something entirely new. Reality bent around her, powers no one fully understood. She wasn't just another asset like Pietro. She was something far greater. I leaned back, fingers tapping lightly against the desk. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. Chapter 24, Sister Arrives. The morning came faster than I expected. The hive hummed below, steady and calm, but my attention wasn't on the brood. My eyes stayed on the monitors, watching the perimeter. The sun had barely risen when the first alert came. A lone figure approached the property. Dark coat, long hair, steady stride. Wanda Maximoff. I leaned forward, tapping the desk lightly. Right on time. The cameras tracked her as she walked past the outer fence. No hesitation, no fear. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the property briefly before settling forward again. Her steps were measured, every movement controlled. I keyed the door release. The gate swung open silently. She walked through without slowing, her expression unreadable. By the time I stepped into the entryway, she was already there. Her eyes locked onto mine instantly. They were sharp, guarded, but calm. You, she said flatly. Me, I replied cheerfully. Her gaze flicked briefly past me, scanning the hall. Where is he? I gestured casually, this way. She followed without a word, her footsteps soft against the floor. I led her down into the hive chambers. The air grew warmer, thicker, the sound of buzzing faint but constant. The walls glowed faintly under the artificial lights. At the bottom, Pietro was waiting. Still restrained, drones gripping his arms and legs, his chest heaving from constant struggling. His head snapped up the instant Wanda entered. Wanda, he shouted, his voice cracked with relief and fury. Don't come near him. She stopped immediately, her eyes narrowing as she looked at him. Pietro. I'm fine, he lied instantly, straining against the mandibles. Go back, don't let him. I said I wouldn't hurt him, I interrupted lightly. Shut up, Pietro barked, thrashing harder. Don't talk to her. Wanda's eyes flicked between us, calm but sharp. She stepped closer slowly, ignoring Pietro's protests. What do you want? She asked me directly. I leaned against the railing, grinning faintly. Just a conversation. That's all. Her tone was even, but there was steel underneath. That's all, I confirmed. Pietro's voice cracked. Don't believe him, he's lying. She ignored him again, her gaze steady on me. Then let him go. I shrugged. Eventually, but first I want to know something. Her head tilted slightly. What? I tapped the railing idly. Why Hydra? Why stay with them? Her eyes narrowed faintly. That's none of your business. Maybe not, I admitted cheerfully, but Hydra's not exactly known for being kind. Her jaw tightened. Pietro shouted again, straining so hard the drones shifted to hold him down. Don't answer him. Relax, I said lightly. It's just a question. Wanda's eyes stayed sharp on me. We made our choice. I smirked faintly. Some choice. Her lips pressed together. I let the silence hang for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. Look, I don't care what you do with Hydra. That's your problem. But I wanted to meet you. That's all. She studied me quietly, her expression unreadable. Why? Because you're interesting, I said simply. Her eyes narrowed again. Pietro shouted louder, thrashing violently. Don't talk to him, Wanda. He's trying to use you. Calm down, I said cheerfully. I'm not using anyone. Liar, Pietro roared, his voice cracked with desperation. Don't trust him, please. Wanda finally turned toward him, her expression softening just slightly. Pietro. He froze at her tone, his body going still for the first time since she entered. His chest heaved, his eyes wide with panic. She looked back at me. You'll let him go. Soon, I said lightly. Not yet. Her eyes flicked briefly to the Queen crouched nearby, then back to me. Her expression was calm, but her fists clenched at her sides. You don't want to fight me, I said cheerfully. Try me, she replied evenly. Pietro shouted again, thrashing violently. Stop, don't fight him, just go. I chuckled softly, raising my hands. Easy, like I said, I just wanted to talk. You came, we talked, that's good enough. Her eyes narrowed, so let him go. I studied her for a moment, then sighed. Fine. I clapped my hands once. The drones released Pietro instantly, stepping back into formation. He collapsed to the ground, panting heavily, before scrambling to his feet and running to Wanda's side. He grabbed her arm, pulling her close, his voice sharp with panic. We're leaving, now. She glanced at me once more, her eyes still sharp. Then she nodded slightly, letting Pietro pull her toward the stairs. As they left the chamber, his voice echoed back, furious and desperate. If you come near her again, I'll kill you. I smirked faintly. Noted. Back in the control room, I leaned into the chair, tapping the pen against the desk. The monitors glowed steadily. Queens laying, workers feeding, soldiers patrolling. But my thoughts weren't on them. They were on Wanda. Her eyes calm, sharp, controlled. Even in silence, she carried weight. Chaos magic wasn't just power. It was something Hydra didn't understand, something no one did. And now she was in play. I leaned back, grinning faintly. This is going to be fun. Chapter 25, Expanding the Swarm. The echo of Pietro's shouting still lingered faintly in my ears as I closed the control room door. The monitors glowed in front of me, steady as ever. Queens crouched low, abdomens pulsing as they laid. Workers moved in neat lines, dragging meat into feeding pits. Soldiers patrolled, mandibles snapping quietly in rhythm. I leaned forward, elbows on the desk, tapping the pen against my logbook. Wanda had come, seen him, and taken him back. That part was finished. But the hives were still here, and they needed to grow. I flipped open the logbook, skimming the last numbers. Output was steady, but not enough. Not for what was coming. At the current pace, I'd reach several 100,000 in a few months. That wasn't bad, but not nearly enough. I sighed lightly, setting the pen down. All right, time to push harder. I made my way down into the tunnels. The air grew heavier with every step, thick with humidity. The steady hum of wings vibrated faintly in the walls. The smell of soil and meat filled my lungs. The first chamber opened wide before me. An ant queen crouched low, her abdomen pulsing as fresh eggs dropped onto the soil. Workers scurried instantly to collect them, dragging them to incubation pits. Soldiers circled slowly, antennae twitching, mandibles clacking. I crouched near the railing, watching closely. How many today? The counter embedded in the chamber wall ticked steadily upward. Hundreds, not enough. I tapped the railing with my finger. You can do more. The queen buzzed faintly, her wings vibrating once. I turned, moving deeper into the tunnels. The termite chamber came next. Their queen was massive now, her pale body filling nearly half the chamber. Workers clambered constantly over her, tending to her abdomen as eggs dropped in steady streams. The walls of the chamber were lined with resin, tunnels reinforced with thick fiber. The smell here was sharper, almost acrid, but the numbers were better. Thousands of eggs already incubating, larvae writhing faintly as workers shifted them into proper piles. "Good work," I said cheerfully, leaning against the frame. "Keep it up." The queen's antennae twitched slowly in response. The wasps were next. Their nests clung to the upper walls of their chamber, layered thick with resin. Queens perched high, their abdomens pulsing steadily as workers buzzed around them. Soldiers hovered at the edges, wings vibrating in a low, steady rhythm. I whistled softly. Not bad. The workers carried fresh meat upward, mandibles slicing it neatly before tucking it into feeding pits. The nests had grown double in size since the last inspection, their structure precise and strong. "Keep building," I said. One queen buzzed sharply, wings flaring for a moment before folding again. The beetles moved slower, but they were steady. Their burrows stretched deep into the soil, reinforced by hardened resin. The queen lay at the center, thick and heavy, her brood clustering around her abdomen. Larvae wriggled faintly in the soil as workers fed them strips of meat. The soldiers stood near the edges, their mandibles clicking in steady rhythm. Their bodies were heavier than the others, their shells gleaming faintly under the lights. I crouched again, scribbling into the logbook. "More tunnels here. You're outgrowing this chamber." The queen shifted faintly, her antennae twitching. When I returned to the main corridor, the hum of the hive filled the air from every direction. The queens were laying, the workers were feeding, the soldiers were patrolling. Everything was in rhythm, but the numbers weren't high enough, not yet. I pulled the radio from my belt and keyed in the supply line. The voice on the other end answered quickly. "Yes, sir." "New order," I said cheerfully. "Double the shipments. Start today. Another 200 million's worth of meat. I don't want a single day without full supply." The voice hesitated briefly. 200 million. "You heard me," I said. "Get it done." "Yes, sir." The line clicked dead. I slid the radio back onto my belt, grinning faintly. That'll keep them busy. Back in the control room, I flipped through the monitors again. The deliveries were already in motion. Refrigerated trucks lined up at the outer gate. Security cleared them through automatically, and workers unloaded crates of frozen meat onto the feeding platforms. The brood responded instantly. Workers swarmed the platforms, mandibles slicing, dragging strips back into the tunnels. Soldiers circled the platforms, antennae twitching sharply, keeping the process orderly. The queens buzzed faintly, their abdomens pulsing faster. Eggs dropped in thicker streams. Workers scrambled to collect them, piling them into incubation pits as quickly as possible. The counters ticked upward on every feed. Hundreds became thousands. Thousands became tens of thousands. I leaned back in the chair, grinning faintly. That's more like it. The hum of the hive filled the room, steady and constant. By late afternoon, the numbers had climbed higher than ever before. The termite queen alone had laid nearly 20,000 eggs. The wasps had doubled their nest size. The beetles had burrowed deeper, their larvae multiplying steadily. The ants were still slower, but even they had increased their clusters by a third. The logbook filled page after page as I scribbled down the updates. Numbers, rates, estimates. At this pace, 1 million was no longer a distant goal. It was inevitable. I closed the logbook, set the pen down, and leaned back in the chair again. The monitors glowed steadily, queens laying, workers feeding, soldiers patrolling. The hive was growing, faster than ever, Chapter 26, building new ground. The hum of the hive was steady, filling the control room with its constant vibration. The monitors glowed with images of queens laying, workers dragging meat, soldiers pacing their patrol routes. Numbers were climbing faster every day now. But there was a problem. I flipped through the logbook, tapping the pen against the page. We're outgrowing this place. The tunnels stretched for miles underground already. The chambers were packed full of brood, the feeding platforms constantly crowded, the queens producing at maximum output. Even with shipments arriving non-stop, the base was reaching capacity. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. Need more space. Not just more, a lot more. I pulled the laptop closer, fingers tapping quickly across the keys. Real estate databases opened on the screen. Listings scrolled past, warehouses, factories, private compounds. None of them big enough. None of them private enough. Then I switched searches. Islands. The map filled with dots. Remote, isolated, expensive, perfect. I grinned faintly. That'll do. It took hours to filter the list. Too small, too populated, too visible. I dismissed them one by one until only a handful remained. A cluster of islands in the Pacific, technically uninhabited, owned by a shell company that hadn't used them in decades. I leaned forward, scanning the details. Large enough to build on, remote enough to keep quiet, close enough to supply lines. Perfect, I said cheerfully. I tapped into Tony's accounts, sliding money through shell corporations until the numbers blurred together. It wasn't hard. The man bled money constantly, half of it vanishing into projects he never even remembered authorizing. A few $100 million more wouldn't even make him blink. I filed the purchase, hidden under layers of fake ownership. Within hours, the islands were mine. The next morning, I stood on the deck of a private boat, the wind sharp against my face. The ocean stretched endless in every direction, waves rising and falling steadily. Ahead, the islands rose from the water, green with trees, white with beaches, surrounded by jagged rocks. No houses, no boats, no people. Just space. The boat cut through the water, approaching the largest island. The sand crunched under my boots as I stepped off, the salt air thick in my lungs. I looked around slowly. Dense trees stretched inland, leaves shifting in the wind. Birds scattered at the sound of my footsteps. The soil under the trees was dark and damp, perfect for digging. I crouched, scooping a handful of dirt, letting it fall between my fingers. Rich, fertile. I grinned faintly. You'll do. The first shipment arrived by air. Massive cargo planes thundered across the sky, landing on a makeshift strip carved into the sand. Crates rolled down ramps, stacked high with reinforced equipment, digging machines, portable power generators, crates of meat sealed in refrigeration. Workers moved quickly, setting up temporary camps along the beach. Tents rose, generators hummed, lights flickered to life. I walked among them, hands in my pockets, grinning faintly at the controlled chaos. Get it underground fast. Don't waste time. Yes, sir, one of the foremen replied, barking orders at his crew. The machines roared to life, tearing into the soil. Tunnels opened slowly at first, then spread wider as drills and loaders cut deeper. Within hours, the first chamber was carved out. Reinforced walls lined with resin followed quickly, workers moving in rhythm to prepare for the Queen's arrival. The smell of earth filled the air. The ground vibrated faintly as the work spread further. I stood at the edge of the pit, arms crossed. Not bad for a start. By evening, the first brood arrived. Cargo planes landed again, this time carrying sealed containers. Inside, queens shifted slowly, their antennae twitching against the walls. Workers and soldiers clustered tightly around them, buzzing faintly. The containers lowered carefully into the new chamber. The queens crawled out one by one, their mandibles clacking softly as they settled into the fresh soil. Workers immediately began digging, dragging meat from the crates, carving out feeding pits. Soldiers spread to the edges, patrolling with steady clicks. The hum of the hive began to fill the air again, steady and constant. I leaned against the railing, grinning faintly. Home sweet home. The expansion continued non-stop. Machines tore deeper into the soil, carving new chambers every hour. Queens were installed in each, their broods spilling outward instantly. Workers swarmed, soldiers patrolled, feeding platforms filled with meat. The numbers climbed faster than ever. Thousands became tens of thousands in a single day. By the end of the week, the island hummed with the sound of the hive. The forest above was untouched, birds still flitting through the trees, waves still crashing on the beach. But below, the soil was alive. Queens laid without pause. Workers fed constantly. Soldiers guarded every tunnel. The counters ticked higher and higher on my laptop. I leaned back in the chair inside the temporary camp, grinning faintly. Millions won't take long now. Chapter 27, Hydra at Sea. The hum of the hive on the island was steady, different from the base back home. The soil here was softer, damper, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore mixed with the constant buzzing and clicking beneath the earth. I stood near the shoreline, boots sinking slightly into the sand, the sea wind sharp against my face. Cargo planes had just left after unloading another shipment of meat. Workers were dragging crates into the tunnels while soldiers patrolled along the beach. Everything was running smoothly. Then the perimeter alarm chimed. The handheld console on my belt buzzed sharply. I pulled it free, tapping the screen. Red dots blinked on the radar. Dozens. I squinted toward the horizon. At first, only the endless stretch of ocean was visible. Then faint shapes appeared, dark against the water. Ships. I pulled out the binoculars, raising them to my eyes. Boats cut through the waves in formation. Smaller speedboats at the front, larger vessels behind. Each one painted dark, Hydra insignias faint on their hulls. Armed men crowded the decks, rifles glinting in the sun. Heavy weapons mounted on the larger ships tracked steadily toward the island. I lowered the binoculars, grinning faintly. Well, they're not wasting time. The console buzzed again as the radar updated. At least 50 soldiers across 3 ships, with another 20 spread across the speedboats. Rocket launchers, mounted machine guns, more disciplined than the smaller raiding parties I'd seen before. I tapped the console, sending a command. The hive stirred instantly. Queens shifted in their chambers, mandibles clacking softly. Workers paused briefly in their digging before resuming at faster pace. Soldiers gathered near the tunnel mouths, antennae twitching sharply. One queen, the largest of the ants, rose slowly from her chamber, her drones clustering around her. Another, a wasp queen, buzzed her wings sharply, her soldiers following in precise formation. The tunnels vibrated faintly as they surged toward the surface. The first speedboats hit the beach. Hydra soldiers leapt into the shallow water, rifles raised, boots splashing against the sand. They moved in perfect formation, shouting to each other in sharp German commands. The mounted guns on the boats opened fire instantly, bullets tearing into the sand, spraying dirt upward. I tapped the console again. The soil near the tree line cracked open. Ant drones poured out, hundreds of them, their black shells glinting under the sun. They surged across the sand in tight lines, mandibles snapping, legs moving in perfect rhythm. Hydra's front line froze briefly at the sight before opening fire. Bullets tore through the first wave of drones, shattering shells, scattering limbs. But the swarm pressed harder, closing the distance in seconds. They hit Hydra's line like a wall. Men screamed as drones latched onto their legs, dragging them down into the surf. Rifles clattered against the sand as mandibles clamped down, snapping bones. The mounted guns on the boat swung wildly, cutting down dozens, but for every drone that fell, more crawled from the tunnels. The queen surged behind them, her massive bulk tearing through the soil. Her mandibles snapped shut around one of the speedboats, crushing its hull instantly. Soldiers tumbled into the water, screaming as drones swarmed over them. The sea turned red. On the horizon, the larger ships opened fire. Shells whistled through the air, slamming into the tree line. Explosions shook the ground, trees splintering into pieces. Smoke billowed upward, filling the sky. The drones didn't falter. They poured across the beach in endless streams, swarming the speedboats, dragging soldiers into the water. Hydra fought back with disciplined bursts of fire, rockets hissing into the soil, grenades exploding in tight blasts. Dozens of drones fell, their bodies torn apart, but the swarm pressed harder. The Wasp Queen rose next. She burst from the soil with a deafening buzz, her massive wings beating against the air. Her drones followed, dozens of winged bodies swarming upward. They scattered across the sky in tight formation, diving at Hydra's soldiers, mandibles clamping down, wings buzzing furiously. Hydra's rifles snapped upward, firing into the air. Several wasps dropped instantly, their bodies tumbling into the sand, but the rest pressed harder. Soldiers were dragged screaming from the decks of the ships, lifted into the air before being torn apart. The mounted guns swung skyward, rattling violently as bullets cut through wings. Smoke filled the air as drones burned, but the swarm never stopped. One of the larger ships fired another shell. It slammed into the beach, detonating with a sharp boom. Sand erupted upward, drones scattering in every direction. The Ant Queen shrieked, her mandibles clacking violently. She surged across the beach, slamming into the side of the ship. Metal groaned loudly as her weight hit, the hull denting inward. Soldiers on deck scrambled, firing downward, but the Queen ignored the bullets. Her mandibles clamped shut around the railing, tearing it free. Her drones swarmed up behind her, climbing the hull, mandibles snapping as they tore through soldiers. Blood sprayed across the deck as Hydra fought desperately to push them back. The wasps swarmed up again, striking at the mounted guns. One soldier was dragged screaming into the air, his rifle spinning into the ocean below. Another was torn off the deck entirely, his body vanishing beneath the waves. I leaned against the railing above the beach, watching calmly. Hydra's forces were disciplined, armed, and prepared, but the swarm was endless. For every drone that fell, 3 more surged upward from the tunnels. For every soldier Hydra dragged to safety, another was pulled screaming into the soil. The ocean churned red as bodies sank beneath the waves. By the time the sun reached its peak, the battle was decided. The speedboats were gone, their hulls shattered, their crews dragged under. The larger ships burned, smoke rising thick into the sky as the swarm tore through their decks. Gunfire slowed, then stopped entirely. The beach was littered with broken drones and fallen men. The queens crouched near the shoreline, their mandibles clacking softly. Their drones circled them, dragging bodies and weapons into the tunnels. The smoke from the ships drifted slowly across the water, mixing with the salt air. I tapped the console once, sending the command. Clean it up. The drones obeyed instantly. Within an hour, the beach was clear again. No rifles, no bodies, no wreckage. The ocean waves rolled steadily against the sand as if nothing had happened. The queens sank slowly back into the soil, their drones following. The tunnels sealed behind them, leaving only churned sand as a mark of the battle. I leaned back against the railing, hands in my pockets, grinning faintly. Not bad. Chapter 28, Ross Knox. The morning was quiet. The ocean rolled in slow waves against the sand, seagulls circling lazily overhead. The hive below hummed as usual, the queens laying without pause, the brood dragging meat into incubation pits. I sat outside the small prefab cabin overlooking the beach, coffee mug warm in my hands. The smell of salt mixed with damp soil. For once, it felt calm. Then the low thrum of engines cut across the air. I looked up. Helicopters. 3 of them, dark green, approaching in formation from the horizon. Behind them, the ocean shimmered with the faint silhouettes of ships, military, not Hydra. Big grey hulls, radar towers rising high, the American flag snapping in the wind. I sighed, setting the mug down. Well, that didn't take long. The helicopters slowed, rotors chopping the air as they descended toward the beach. Sand blasted outward in heavy gusts as they touched down. Doors opened. Soldiers in uniform poured out, boots pounding against the sand, rifles slung across their chests. They moved in sharp formation, disciplined, eyes scanning the area with practiced precision. Then the last man stepped out. General Thaddeus Ross. His posture was stiff, shoulders squared, his uniform crisp despite the sea wind. His eyes swept the beach once before locking onto me. His jaw was set tight, his expression sharp and unyielding. "Mr. Stark," he said flatly as he approached. "Morning," I replied cheerfully. "Coffee." He ignored the offer, stopping a few feet away. "We need to talk." "Of course we do," I said, leaning back in the chair. "People don't fly helicopters out here for the view." His eyes narrowed. "You know why I'm here." I raised an eyebrow. "Do I?" Ross gestured broadly to the sand, to the trees beyond, to the island itself. "We've had reports, burning ships, dead men, strange creatures, and all of it points here." I chuckled softly. Creatures sounds like a bad movie. His jaw tightened. "Don't play games with me. I don't have the patience." "Games?" I said, widening my eyes slightly in mock innocence. "General, I wouldn't dream of it." Ross stepped closer, his voice dropping lower, more controlled. "If you've got alien life forms here, they fall under military jurisdiction. They'll be moved into our custody immediately." I tilted my head, grinning faintly. "Aliens, that's a new one." His expression didn't change. "Enough." All right, I said, holding up my hands. "Look, you flew all the way out here, so let's be clear. What exactly do you think you saw?" Ross's eyes were hard. "Creatures that don't belong on this planet. And if you're controlling them, then you're sitting on the most dangerous weapon I've ever seen." "Dangerous weapons," I repeated. "You sure you're not talking about my brother?" Ross's jaw clenched. "This isn't a joke." I leaned forward slightly, my grin softening. "I know." The soldiers behind him shifted slightly, rifles still slung, but hands tight around the grips. Their eyes flicked between me and Ross, waiting. I leaned back again, casual. "But you're wrong. No aliens here. Just sand, trees, and a lot of seagulls." Ross's eyes bored into mine. "You expect me to believe that?" I shrugged. "Believe what you want. It's the truth." He stared for a long moment, then exhaled sharply through his nose. "If I find out you're lying." "You'll what?" I interrupted lightly. "Take me in? Good luck. My brother tried that once. Didn't go well." Ross's lips pressed into a thin line. I grinned faintly. "Relax. You're wasting your time here." He glanced past me toward the tree line, his eyes narrowing. "Then you won't mind if we take a look around." I spread my hands. "Be my guest." He gestured to his men. "Sweep the area." The soldiers moved immediately, splitting into groups. Some headed for the tree line, others circled along the beach, eyes scanning, boots crunching against the sand. I stayed in my chair, sipping the last of my coffee, watching calmly. The hive below was silent, exactly as I had ordered. No drones surfaced. No queens stirred. 90% of the tunnel sealed, the other 10 tucked deeper than Ross's men could ever reach. The soldiers combed the area for nearly an hour. They checked the beach, the trees, even poked through the temporary supply camp. Nothing. Ross watched the entire time, his jaw tight, his hands clasped behind his back. When the soldiers returned, one stepped forward and saluted. "Nothing, sir." Ross's eyes narrowed. "Check again." "We checked twice already," the soldier replied. "There's nothing." Ross turned back toward me, his expression sharp. "You've covered your tracks well." I smirked faintly. Or maybe there were no tracks to begin with. His jaw worked, the muscle twitching as he clenched his teeth. Finally, he exhaled slowly, straightening his posture. "This isn't over." I raised my mug in a mock toast, looking forward to round 2. He gave me one last hard look before turning toward the helicopters. We're done here. His soldiers followed quickly, boots pounding against the sand as they boarded again. The rotors roared to life, chopping the air as the helicopters lifted off. Sand blasted outward, whipping against my face. Within minutes, they were gone, vanishing into the horizon. The beach was quiet again. I leaned back in the chair, setting the empty mug on the table beside me. The hum of the hive returned faintly beneath my feet, steady and calm. I grinned faintly. Close 1, Chapter 29, Brother on the Line. The helicopters had only been gone an hour when my phone buzzed on the desk beside me. The name flashing on the screen made me chuckle. Speak of the devil, I muttered, picking it up. Explain, Tony's voice barked through the speaker before I could even say hello. I leaned back in my chair, grinning. Hello to you too. Don't start, Tony snapped. Pepper tells me Ross just came to see you. Ross, as in, I want to put Iron Man under my command, Ross. Why the hell is he showing up at your door? Technically, it was my beach, I said lightly. Not funny, Tony shot back. What did you do? Me, I asked innocently. Nothing. Tony groaned loudly, the sound crackling through the line. Every time you say that, it means you did something. Not true, I said cheerfully. Sometimes it means other people think I did something. He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his tone was sharp. He said something about aliens. I chuckled softly. Yeah, that part surprised me too. Don't play dumb, Tony said. Did you show him something, did you? Relax, I cut in. I didn't show him anything. He came with soldiers, poked around, found nothing, and left angry. End of story. Pepper said he brought 3 helicopters and half a platoon. He did, I said, still grinning. Nice guys, very thorough, didn't even break anything. Stop joking, Tony snapped. His frustration was clear. Do you understand what this means? If Ross thinks you're hiding something, he's not going to drop it. He's going to come back, and next time he'll bring tanks. Sounds fun, I said. There was a pause on the line. I could almost picture him rubbing his temples. You're impossible. And you love me anyway, I said cheerfully. I'm serious, Tony said. I don't need the military breathing down my neck. I've got enough problems already. And you think I do? I asked, raising an eyebrow even though he couldn't see it. You don't care, Tony shot back. That's the difference. I laughed softly, guilty. There was silence for a moment, then Tony sighed heavily. Look, just tell me straight. Is there something I should know, something that's going to bite me later? I leaned back in the chair, staring at the monitors glowing steadily in front of me. The queens laid, the workers fed, the soldiers patrolled. Nope, I said lightly. Tony groaned again. I hate you. No, you don't, I said. No, I don't, he admitted reluctantly. I grinned. See, progress. The call went quiet for a few seconds before Tony spoke again, his tone calmer but still sharp. All right. Let's say I believe you for now. That still leaves the problem that Ross clearly doesn't. If he thinks you're hiding something, then by extension, he thinks I'm hiding something. That drags me into this mess. Welcome to my world, I said. This isn't funny, Tony repeated, though his voice had lost some of the bite. Maybe not, I admitted, but it's manageable. He didn't find anything, right? So as far as he knows, it's just rumors. He can't do much with that. You do know Ross, Tony muttered. Maybe not, I said, but I know how to handle people like him. Trust me. Trust you, Tony repeated, skeptical. Worked so far, I pointed out. He didn't argue, which was as close to agreement as I was going to get. Pepper's voice floated faintly in the background on his end. Tell him about the board meeting. Not now, Tony muttered. Yes, now, Pepper insisted, sharper. He's involved whether you like it or not. What? I asked, leaning forward with interest. Nothing, Tony said quickly. It's not nothing, Pepper called again. The board wants answers about the islands. I raised an eyebrow. Ah, so that's what this is about. I told you not to spend money, Tony snapped. I didn't, I said cheerfully. Your company did. He made a strangled noise. You're unbelievable. Thank you, I said. Not a compliment, Tony shot back. Pepper's voice came through clearly this time as she took the phone. Listen, you can't keep making massive purchases without expecting people to notice. The board is already nervous. Ross showing up makes it worse. Relax, Pep, I said lightly. Nobody's going to connect anything to you. They already have, she said firmly. Ross asked me about Stark Industries contracts this morning. He thinks the two of you are working together. Tony groaned in the background. Fantastic. I shrugged, even though they couldn't see. Then just tell him we're not. It's not that simple, Pepper snapped. I chuckled. It never is with you guys. The call stretched on like that for nearly an hour. Tony paced through arguments. Pepper cut in with her usual sharp corrections, and I teased them both from my chair on the island. By the end, Tony had calmed down slightly, though his irritation was still clear. Fine, he muttered finally. But if Ross comes back, you deal with him, not me, got it? Deal, I said cheerfully. And stop spending my money, Tony added. No promises, I said. He groaned again, and the line went dead. I set the phone down, grinning faintly. The hum of the hive continued below, steady and calm. Chapter 30, Natasha's second visit. The island was quiet again the next morning. The ocean rolled steady against the sand, gulls circling overhead, their cries sharp in the air. The hive below hummed with its usual rhythm, steady and controlled. I sat on the deck of the prefab cabin, a mug of fresh coffee in my hand. The sun reflected off the water, the light almost blinding. For the first time in days, nothing was happening. Then a black helicopter appeared on the horizon. I sighed, setting the mug down. Of course. The rotors chopped the air louder as it came closer, sending birds scattering. It slowed over the beach, sand whipping up in violent gusts as it descended. The door slid open before the wheels even touched. Natasha Romanoff jumped out smoothly, her stride steady, as if the sandstorm from the rotors didn't bother her at all. She wore her usual fitted jacket and tactical boots, no pretense this time. No cleaning supplies, no cover story. She walked directly toward me. Morning, I called cheerfully over the sound of the helicopter. Her eyes stayed sharp on me. We need to talk. I leaned back in the chair, grinning faintly. Everyone is saying that lately. The helicopter lifted off again, leaving only the crash of the waves and the faint hum of the hive beneath my feet. Natasha stopped at the edge of the deck, her arms crossed. Ross filed a report. Ships burned off this coast, soldiers missing, and he claims you have control of something. Fury wants answers. I raised an eyebrow. Ross, the guy who thinks I'm running an alien zoo. Don't make jokes, she said evenly. Who's joking? I asked lightly. That's exactly what he said. Her expression didn't change. Is it true? I spread my hands casually. Look around. Do you see any aliens? She glanced briefly toward the tree line, then back at me. Her eyes were calm, sharp, searching for any twitch, any sign of weakness. You're hiding something, she said finally. I grinned faintly. You've said that before. And I was right, she replied. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Or maybe you're just paranoid. Her lips twitched almost imperceptibly, but she didn't rise to the bait. She stepped onto the deck, her boots thudding softly against the wood. Fury doesn't care about paranoia. He cares about threats, and Ross thinks you're one. I chuckled. Ross thinks everyone's a threat. That doesn't mean he's wrong, Natasha said. I tilted my head, studying her. So what's this? An interrogation, a recruitment pitch, or just a friendly visit? Her gaze didn't waver. That depends on how you answer. I leaned back again, spreading my arms along the chair. All right, ask away. She didn't waste time. What happened to the Hydra assault force? I raised an eyebrow. Hydra. Her tone sharpened. Don't. I sighed, pretending to think. Well, if I had to guess, I'd say the ocean swallowed them. Big waves, bad weather. Happens all the time. Her eyes narrowed. The wreckage says otherwise. Wreckage, I repeated cheerfully. Now that's interesting. Maybe Ross should have led with that instead of aliens. She stepped closer, lowering her voice slightly. Whatever you're doing here, it's drawing attention. Hydra, the military, now us. You can't keep pretending it's nothing. I smirked faintly. Watch me. Her jaw tightened, just for a second, before she smoothed it over. Fury wants cooperation. Cooperation, I repeated. That sounds a lot like control. Not the same thing, she said. Feels the same, I replied. She studied me in silence for a long moment. Then she exhaled slowly. You're reckless. Maybe, I admitted cheerfully, but I'm good at it. Until someone gets hurt, she said. I shrugged. That's when I stopped joking. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the sand beneath the deck, then back to me. How long do you think you can hide it? I grinned faintly. Long enough. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned slightly, scanning the beach, the ocean, the tree line. Every movement was precise, deliberate, as if she could will the truth into appearing. Finally, she looked back at me. Fury, S not going to drop this. I raised my mug in a mock toast. Neither did Ross. Look how that turned out. For the first time, her lips curved faintly upward. Not quite a smile, but close. You're impossible. And you love it, I said cheerfully. She shook her head slightly, stepping back toward the sand. I'll report to Fury. Don't make me come back a third time. Can't promise that, I called after her. She glanced back once, her expression unreadable, before striding toward the helicopter. The rotors thundered again as it descended, sending sand whipping across the beach. She climbed in without hesitation. The helicopter lifted off, banking hard toward the horizon. The beach was quiet again. I leaned back in the chair, sipping what was left of my coffee. The hive hummed faintly below, steady and calm. I chuckled softly. 2 visits, not bad. Chapter 31, Brother in the Hive. The sun was just beginning to dip toward the water when I heard the roar. Not waves, not the hum of the hive beneath my feet, but the sharp, controlled thunder of repulsors cutting through the sky. I leaned back in the deck chair on the cabin porch, half-finished cup of coffee still warm in my hand. Here we go. The streak of red and gold shot across the horizon, cutting low above the tree line before banking hard and slamming into the beach. Sand erupted in every direction, a hot gust of air blasting over the porch. The Mark IV's faceplate snapped open. Tony's face appeared, flushed with heat, his jaw tight, eyes locked straight on me. You, he snapped, pointing at me as the armor hissed down. Me, I answered cheerfully, raising my cup. Coffee. Don't start, he barked, stomping forward across the sand. The servos in his suit whined with every heavy step. I've had a week from hell, Ross at my throat, Pepper calling me every 5 minutes, the board threatening to jump ship, and guess what? All of it points back here, to you. I grinned faintly. Must be doing something right. His face twisted. Not funny. You've been jerking me around since Afghanistan. You've got the military calling you an alien breeder, SHIELD sending in Natasha twice, and you, he jabbed a finger hard into my chest plate, the suit's metal clicking against my shirt. You just sit here drinking coffee like it's spring break. Coffee helps me think, I said lightly. Tony groaned loudly, dragging a hand down his face before the helmet slid shut again. Show me. I raised an eyebrow. Show you what? You know damn well what. His voice came sharp through the external speakers. The bugs, the hives, The giant nightmare-inducing zoo you've been breeding under my nose. I've seen enough of them already. Afghanistan, Obi. I'm done pretending you're not up to your neck in this. So show me everything. Now. I sighed dramatically, standing and setting the coffee down. You could have just asked nicely. That was nicely, Tony shot back. For you, I teased. He muttered something under his breath I couldn't hear over the servos. I waved him along. Come on, tin can, try to keep up. We cut through the tree line. The forest swallowed us quickly, damp air heavy with soil and leaves. Birds scattered at the sound of Tony's armored boots crunching against roots, their cries fading deeper into the canopy. Seriously, Tony said, voice echoing through the helmet. You've got entire branches of the government convinced you're hiding aliens. And you thought an island full of secret bunkers was the way to not get noticed. I smirked. It worked until Ross showed up. That's not comforting, Tony muttered. We reached the clearing at the island's center. The reinforced hatch sat buried beneath leaves and soil, its edges disguised against the ground. I crouched, keyed the panel, and the hatch